After my system romance mission failed, I returned to my original world. I got married and had a child. Until 7 years later, the system tracked me down. The mental state of your original target is highly unstable, and your first child is crying, demanding to see you. Host, could you go back and take one last look? I hadn't been in contact with the system for years. When it finally reappeared, my husband, David, and I were walking back from the amusement park with our son. Noah was tugging at my hand, whining for McDonald's for dinner. I was just about to scold him and tell him he'd had enough burgers for the week, when suddenly, a familiar electronic hum echoed in my ear. Then came the system's robotic voice. Host, long time no see. It looked at our happy family of 3 and seemed to choke up, unsure of how to begin. It's like this. Do you remember that novel transmigration mission from years ago? Ever since you left, the target's mental state has been steadily deteriorating. He's incredibly unstable now. And the son you gave birth to back then. He's crying and demanding to see you. Could you go back and check on the 2 of them? I froze. To say I had forgotten that part of my life would be a lie. Back then, I had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I had less than 3 years to live. During the most agonizing phase of my treatment, I was bound to this romance system. I was pulled into an angst-filled, second-chance romance novel. My mission was to win the heart of the devoted second male lead. As long as he abandoned his entanglement with the male and female leads and agreed to marry me, my mission would be a success. I would be allowed to stay in that world and that body forever. If I returned to my original world, I didn't have much time left anyway. So, I cherished the opportunity. When Arthur was ultimately rejected by the female lead, Chloe, I stayed by his side. I comforted him. I kept him company. Slowly, his cold demeanor toward me softened into something gentle and attentive. Later, after a messy drunken night, I got pregnant. I thought that was it. I thought we were going to get married, but his tone suddenly turned ice cold. Samantha, you come from nothing. I can't marry you yet. Have the child. Once he grows up a bit, and the family officially accepts him, then we'll get married. That was my first child. I named him Leo. I poured all my blood, sweat, and tears into raising him. The Sterling family was a billionaire dynasty. They controlled dozens of publicly traded companies, and had their hands in countless industries. Arthur was the eldest son. Even though I was looked down upon, Leo, as the eldest grandson, was highly valued by the entire family. Almost every week, he was chauffeured back to the family manor so his grandparents could dote on him. By his first birthday, his first trust fund had already been established. When he was 3 or 4, I was still used to calling an Uber to take him out, but Leo could already distinguish between the bespoke leather interiors of a Rolls-Royce and a Bentley. When he was 5 or 6, I held him in my lap and tried to teach him basic addition and subtraction. He suddenly threw his pencil down. He looked up at me. I'm going to inherit the company anyway. What's the point of learning this? I never expected words like that to come out of a little child's mouth. That day, I gave him a long, stern lecture. Leo threw a massive tantrum and cried. Unable to watch, Arthur intervened and took him back to the main estate. The father and son didn't return to our apartment for a long time. The next time I saw them, months had passed. I had packed a homemade lunch and went to the estate to pick Leo up, planning to apologize and tell him Mommy had been too harsh. Instead, I watched him step out of a sleek black luxury SUV. His left hand was holding Arthur's, and his right hand was holding the hand of a woman in designer heels. In a sweet, childish voice, I heard him say, "Chloe, you should marry my dad. My mom and dad aren't married anyway, so you can marry him." I stood frozen in place, clutching the lunchbox. Chloe was the female lead of this world. After going around in circles, she had come back. She tilted her head, sneaking a glance at Arthur, and smiled. "Why? Don't you want your mommy and daddy to be together?" Leo hesitated. "But Grandpa and Grandma don't like my mom, and Dad doesn't like her either." Arthur remained completely silent. His expression was blank. He didn't say a single word. I really should have seen it coming. I had just been harboring a pathetic, naive fantasy that things would somehow get better. But they didn't. The devoted second male lead would always be drawn back to the female lead. Even the child I gave birth to was no exception. It made me look like an absolute joke. I didn't speak to anyone. I just turned around and walked away. That night, I rebooted the system. I forfeit this mission. I want to go home. The system was utterly shocked by my decision to quit. Host, why? Even if the target won't marry you, you can just wait it out. As long as he doesn't marry anyone else, you can stay here indefinitely. I thought of the way Leo had looked up at Chloe. I let out a self-deprecating laugh. Honestly, with the female lead back in the picture, given Arthur's personality, he would undoubtedly choose to be with her eventually. I might as well return to reality. Who knows, if I catch my cancer early enough, I might be able to squeeze out a few more years. Seeing my resolve, the system's usually flat, mechanical voice let out a heavy sigh. Understood. Give me a moment, host. I'll submit an appeal to my superiors, and see if I can help you out. When it returned, a full night had passed. This time, the system's volume was noticeably louder. Host. My appeal was approved. You can go home. You'll return to the exact moment you first transmigrated here. I pulled all the mission points you earned here, plus some of my own personal savings from past jobs, and bought you a perfectly healthy body. So when you go back, your cancer will be completely cured. Don't worry. I was stunned. I asked instinctively, you used your own points? Won't you get in trouble? The system hummed dismissively. It's fine. We're supposed to build good relationships with our hosts anyway. If I ever need a favor in the future, I might have to bother you. True to its word, after I returned to the real world, the system cured my cancer. I lived life like a normal person. I met a man I loved, and who loved me. And I had my second child. The system never appeared again, until today. Its tone was incredibly defeated. The main issue is that the kid Leo is showing severe signs of walking down a dark path. He's 13 now, but his mindset is bizarrely mature and detached. He's completely isolated and has no friends. We're terrified he's going to grow up into a major villain. So we want to beg you, host, could you please go back and just keep him company for 1 month? I thought back to the day I abandoned the mission. If the system hadn't used its own points to petition its superiors for me, I might not even be alive right now. So even though I deeply, truly did not want to return to that world, I decided to say yes. But I said I have to discuss this with my husband first. After all, I'm married now. The system immediately agreed. Yes, of course. I'll wait for you. My husband, David, knew all about this chapter of my life. He was an architect. He was also my boss. Before we officially started dating, I had confessed the entire story of my transmigration to him. So when he heard the word system, he didn't look surprised. He just stopped chopping vegetables. He looked at me, his breathing hitching slightly. Sam, you're going back? Will you not come back? Yes, of course. I'll come back. He let out a sigh of relief. I looked at David's face. The kitchen light cast a warm glow across his features, softening the sharp lines of his jaw. Noah was still sitting at the dining table behind him, swinging his little legs while happily arranging dinosaur-shaped fries on his plate. For a moment, I suddenly felt unreal. 7 years ago, I had desperately clawed my way out of that world. Now the past was standing at my doorstep again. I walked over and wrapped my arms around David's waist from behind. I'm coming back, I said quietly. The system only asked for 1 month. David lowered his eyes. His hand covered mine instinctively. Last time you said you'd only be there a few years, he murmured. Then you disappeared for almost a decade from your perspective. I froze. He was right. Time flow between worlds wasn't synchronized. For me, I had only been gone from reality for 3 years before returning cured. But from David's perspective, if I vanished again, who knew how long it might become? The system hurriedly interrupted. Host, this time is different. We've stabilized the channel already. 1 month there equals exactly 1 month here. I guarantee it. David still looked unconvinced. The system immediately sounded like a customer service employee on the verge of tears. I can sign an agreement. I can stamp it. I can even mortgage my year-end bonus points. Despite the tension, I almost laughed. David pinched the bridge of his nose. Can systems even have year-end bonuses? Of course we do. We also have performance evaluations. The sheer indignation in its mechanical voice finally broke the heaviness in the room. David sighed. Then he turned around completely and pulled me into his arms. Do you want to go? He asked softly. That question mattered more than anything else. Did I want to? Honestly, no. I didn't miss Arthur. I didn't miss the Sterling family. And I certainly didn't miss the feeling of standing there with that lunchbox in my hands while my own child rejected me. But when I thought about 13-year-old Leo sitting alone somewhere in that enormous mansion, my chest still tightened painfully. No matter how many times I told myself I had let go, he was still the child I had carried for 10 months. The baby I had stayed up countless nights holding through fevers. The little boy who used to curl up against me and whisper, "Mommy, tell me another story." I closed my eyes briefly. "I'll go," I whispered. David was silent for a long time. Finally, he kissed my forehead. "Then go. But," he added calmly, "if anyone bullies you this time, tell me immediately." The system instantly promised. "Don't worry. We have complaint channels now. Cross-world domestic dispute mediation has improved tremendously in recent years." David. Noah, who had been quietly listening while eating fries, suddenly raised his little hand. "Mommy," he asked cautiously, "are you going on a business trip?" I crouched down in front of him. "Something like that." His cheeks puffed up immediately. "Then can you come back before my school sports day?" My heart softened instantly. "I will." He stretched out his tiny pinky finger seriously. "Pinky promise." I hooked my finger around his. "Pinky promise." That night, after Noah fell asleep, David helped me pack a suitcase. Even though the system insisted I could materialize clothing there instantly using data reconstruction, David ignored it completely and folded my sweaters one by one anyway. Halfway through packing, he suddenly asked quietly, "What was he like?" I knew immediately who he meant. "Arthur." I paused while folding pajamas. "Very handsome," I admitted honestly. David's expression darkened slightly. I almost smiled. But his personality was terrible. Cold, prideful, emotionally constipated. The kind of man who expected everyone else to understand him without ever speaking properly. The more I spoke, the more dissatisfied I became. He'd get jealous and say nothing. Get angry and say nothing. Want affection and still say nothing. David listened silently. Then he nodded once. "Sounds inferior to me." I burst out laughing. The system couldn't help muttering, "Actually, the target really has been miserable these years." Neither David nor I responded. The system awkwardly shut up. The next morning, before leaving, David drove me to the agreed location. According to the system, reopening a cross-world channel required an enormous amount of energy. So the transfer point appeared in the abandoned underground parking lot of an unfinished building. It looked suspiciously like a human trafficking site. The system protested furiously. Our budget was cut. I hugged David tightly before leaving. He buried his face briefly against my hair. "When you come back," he said softly, "I'll take leave from work. We'll go on vacation with Noah." I nodded. Then the system finally activated the transfer channel. A familiar white light engulfed me instantly. The sensation of transmigration still felt like being stuffed into a washing machine and violently spin-dried. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I heard was glass shattering. Crash. A crystal vase exploded against the wall not far away. The servants nearby trembled in fear. No one dared move. And in the middle of the enormous living room stood a tall teenage boy in a black school uniform. His shoulders were already nearly as broad as Arthur's had been. His face, however, looked exactly like mine. The boy's eyes were terrifyingly cold. "Get out," he said flatly. The room fell deathly silent. A servant shakily spoke up. "Young master, please eat something." Another glass crashed violently onto the floor. The boy smiled, but there was no warmth in it at all. I said, "Get out." At that exact moment, his gaze suddenly shifted and landed directly on me. Time seemed to freeze. The boy stared at me motionlessly. The color drained from his face little by little. The glass cup slipped from his fingers. Shattered. His lips trembled. For the first time, the terrifying calmness on his face completely cracked. Mom. The single word came out hoarse. Fragile. Like something buried for years beneath ice and finally breaking through. The entire living room froze. The servants all turned to stare at me in horror. One elderly housekeeper even dropped the tray in her hands with a loud clatter. I couldn't breathe for a second, because the 13-year-old standing in front of me no longer resembled the spoiled little boy in my memories. Leo had grown terrifyingly beautiful. His features were sharp and refined, inheriting Arthur's cold elegance, but his eyes looked dark and exhausted in a way no child should. There were faint shadows beneath them, like he hadn't slept properly in years. Too thin. That was my first thought. The Sterling family could buy half the world, yet somehow this child looked half-starved emotionally. The system whispered nervously in my ear. See? He's been unstable for years. Leo took a step toward me, then another. Slowly, cautiously, like he was terrified I would disappear if he moved too quickly. His voice shook. Mom. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, he suddenly stopped dead. His expression changed instantly. All the vulnerability vanished. The coldness returned like armor snapping back into place. His eyes swept over my clothes, my wedding ring, the faint tan line from years spent under a different sun. Then he looked at me again. You got married, he said flatly. Not a question. A statement. The servants nearby looked ready to faint. Apparently nobody had expected the dead ex-mistress to suddenly resurrect in the middle of the Sterling mansion. And certainly not married. The system coughed awkwardly. Technically host completed her return-to-reality retirement package. Shut up, I thought. Leo's gaze stayed locked on my left hand. His fingers clenched slowly at his sides. For a 13-year-old, he was unnervingly unreadable. Too controlled. Too calm. That kind of restraint on a child wasn't healthy. Finally, he asked quietly, Did you have another child too? My throat tightened. Yes. Silence. The atmosphere in the room became suffocating. Then Leo laughed softly. It wasn't a normal laugh. It sounded hollow. So you really abandoned me? My chest felt like it had been stabbed. Leo, don't call me that. His voice turned icy instantly. You lost the right years ago. The servants collectively lowered their heads further. Nobody dared breathe. I looked at the boy in front of me carefully, and suddenly understood something horrifying. He truly believed I abandoned him willingly. No one had ever explained anything to him. Of course they hadn't. How could they explain transmigration? Systems? Parallel worlds? To everyone here, I had simply disappeared overnight. A mother vanishing without even saying goodbye. No wonder he'd become like this. The system whispered weakly. This is why our villain risk assessment score keeps rising. I ignored it. I took a slow step forward. Leo's body tensed instantly, like a stray animal expecting pain. That reaction alone nearly shattered me. I softened my voice instinctively. I didn't abandon you. His eyes reddened immediately, but his expression only became colder. Liar. You left for 7 years. I waited for you every single day during the first year. His breathing became uneven. Then every week. Then every month. By the end, his voice had become terrifyingly calm again. I stopped waiting after the 3rd year. Every word felt like a knife. I had imagined many reunion scenarios on the way here. Hatred, resentment, indifference. But somehow the reality was worse. Because underneath all his anger, Leo was still waiting. Even now. Still waiting for an explanation. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed from upstairs. A deep, cold voice rang out sharply. What happened? The moment that voice appeared, the entire living room atmosphere changed. The servants straightened immediately in fear. And I froze completely. Because after 7 years, I heard Arthur Sterling's voice again. Heavy footsteps descended the staircase. Steady. Unhurried. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone accustomed to controlling everything around him. Then Arthur appeared. For a moment nobody spoke. 7 years had passed, but time seemed unfairly kind to him. He looked even more imposing than before. The sharpness of youth had settled into something colder and more dangerous. He wore a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, exposing the expensive watch at his wrist. His features remained devastatingly handsome, but the gentleness I once remembered seeing in rare moments had completely vanished. And the instant he saw me, he stopped walking. Completely. The world seemed to go silent. Even Leo turned rigid beside me. Arthur stared at me like he was looking at a ghost. No, not a ghost. Something worse. Something he'd wanted desperately and hated equally for years. The color slowly drained from his face. His fingers tightened around the stair railing hard enough for his knuckles to whiten. For the first time in my entire life, I saw Arthur Sterling lose composure. Samantha? His voice was almost inaudible. The system whispered nervously. Warning. Target emotional fluctuations exceeding safe parameters. I almost wanted to tell it to shut up forever. Arthur descended the remaining stairs slowly. His eyes never left my face. It felt suffocating, like being dragged back into a life I'd already buried. Finally, he stopped a few feet away from me, close enough that I could smell the faint cedar scent of his cologne. Exactly the same as before. His gaze swept across me rapidly, almost greedily, like he was confirming I was real. Alive. Whole. Not another hallucination. Then his eyes landed on my wedding ring. Everything in his expression froze. The temperature in the room plummeted instantly. Leo noticed it too. His lips curved slightly. That tiny smile looked strangely cruel. Surprised? Leo said softly. Mom remarried. Arthur didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on my hand. After a long silence, he finally spoke. You got married. Again, not a question. I nodded once. Yes. The air became unbearably tense. The servants looked like they wanted to evaporate. Arthur suddenly laughed quietly. It was a low, hoarse sound. Not amusement. Something closer to self-mockery. I looked for you for 7 years. My heart skipped painfully. He continued staring at me. I searched every city, every hospital, every immigration record. I thought you were dead. His voice remained calm. Too calm. That calmness was far more frightening than shouting. The system whispered. This is also part of why his mental condition collapsed. I ignored it again. Arthur took another step closer. Then one day, he said quietly, Leo told me maybe you left because you finally realized you never loved us. Leo's expression stiffened slightly. Arthur smiled faintly. A completely exhausted smile. And I realized I couldn't even deny it. Something twisted painfully in my chest. Because back then, hadn't I truly left believing neither father nor son needed me? Arthur looked thinner than before too. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who hadn't rested in years. Then suddenly, Leo moved. He stepped directly between us, blocking Arthur's line of sight. The movement was instinctive, protective, possessive. His voice turned cold immediately. Don't scare her. The room fell silent again. Arthur looked at his son for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted back to me. And for the first time, I noticed the terrifying similarity between them. The same restrained emotions. The same pride. The same inability to say what they truly wanted. The system whimpered. This family genuinely communicates like cursed Victorian ghosts. I almost agreed. Then Arthur finally asked the question both of them had been silently thinking since I appeared. Are you staying? Before I could answer, Leo spoke first. No. His voice was sharp. She has a new family now. Every word sounded like he was cutting himself open. But the system said 1 month, he continued coldly. After that she'll leave again anyway. Arthur's eyes darkened instantly. You contacted the system again? Leo's jaw tightened. Ah. So that was how this happened. The system weakly admitted. He threatened to jump off the school rooftop if we didn't help him find host. I nearly blacked out. What? Leo looked away immediately. Arthur closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion washing over his face. He does things like that now, he said quietly. The servants nearby lowered their heads further. As if this wasn't even unusual anymore. Rage exploded inside me instantly. I grabbed Leo by the shoulders before he could react. Do you think threatening your own life is a joke? Leo froze. probably because I was the first person in years willing to scold him directly. His eyes widened slightly. I was furious now. You're 13. What if you slipped? What if something happened? Leo stared at me blankly. Then suddenly, his eyes turned red. His lips trembled once. And in a tiny, broken voice completely unlike the cold boy from earlier, he whispered, "But you wouldn't come otherwise." The moment those words left his mouth, the anger inside me shattered instantly. Leo lowered his head. Like he regretted saying it. Like showing weakness was something shameful. But I had already seen it. Seen the terrified little boy hidden beneath all that coldness. My chest hurt so badly I could barely breathe. Without thinking, I pulled him into my arms. Leo froze completely. Every servant in the room looked horrified. Apparently the young master of the Sterling family had not been hugged in a very, very long time. At first he didn't move at all. His whole body was rigid. Then suddenly, his fingers clenched tightly into the back of my clothes. Like someone drowning. His breathing became uneven instantly. I felt something wet soak slowly through my shoulder. The room fell deathly silent. Leo was crying. But he made absolutely no sound. That silent crying was infinitely more heartbreaking than screaming. The system started bawling electronically in my ear. Our villain rehabilitation plan finally has progress. Shut up. I held the back of Leo's head gently. His hair was softer than I expected. He was already taller than me now. Yet at this moment, he still felt like the little child who used to cling to my legs and demand bedtime stories. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Leo's grip tightened painfully. "You left too long," he said hoarsely. "I know. You didn't even say goodbye." "I know. You missed my 10th birthday." Every accusation landed directly in my heart. "I know." His shoulders started shaking harder. For years, this child had probably rehearsed hatred over and over just to survive being abandoned. But now that I was actually here, all the resentment collapsed into grief instead. Suddenly, a sharp crash sounded nearby. I looked up instinctively. Arthur had turned away and knocked over a glass ashtray onto the floor. His expression remained calm. Too calm. Only the veins standing out along the back of his hand betrayed him. Ah, right. Arthur was still here. Watching his son cry in my arms. Watching the woman who vanished 7 years ago suddenly return only to comfort someone else first. For some reason, that realization made the atmosphere incredibly awkward. The system whispered. Target emotional instability continuing to rise. Could you stop narrating people like stock market reports? Arthur bent down silently to pick up the shattered glass pieces. A servant rushed forward in panic. "Sir, let us handle." I said, "Leave it." His voice was flat. The servant instantly retreated. Leo finally realized what he was doing and abruptly pulled away from me. His eyes were red, but his expression had already shut down again. If I hadn't literally felt his tears seconds ago, I would have thought I'd imagined it. He wiped his face coldly. Embarrassing. I almost laughed from sheer disbelief. This child really inherited every ounce of Arthur's pride. Then, before I could say anything else, my phone rang. The sound echoed sharply through the enormous living room. Everyone froze. Including me. Because the caller ID said, David Redhart. The atmosphere instantly became catastrophic. The system screamed internally. "Oh no." Leo stared at the phone. Arthur's hand stopped moving completely. I suddenly felt like someone caught smuggling explosives through airport security. Very slowly I answered. "Hello." David's warm voice came through immediately. "Did you arrive safely?" The contrast between his gentle tone and the deathly atmosphere here was almost surreal. "Yeah," I said softly. "I just got here." Arthur lowered his eyes. Leo's expression became unreadable. David continued naturally. "Did you eat yet? You skipped breakfast this morning." Before I could answer, Noah's tiny voice suddenly shouted through the speaker. "Mommy." My heart softened instantly. "I miss you already." The living room became so silent I could hear breathing. Noah kept talking loudly. "Daddy burned the eggs." David sounded offended in the background. "I did not burn them." "You made the smoke alarm cry." I nearly smiled automatically. For one brief moment, I forgot where I was, until I looked up again, and saw Arthur staring at me. That gaze felt terrifyingly quiet. Not anger, not jealousy, something emptier. Like a man finally seeing undeniable proof that the place beside me no longer belonged to him. Leo looked away first. His face had gone pale again. I suddenly realized. This was probably the first time either of them had truly understood that I hadn't merely disappeared. I had moved on. Completely. I had another life now. Another husband. Another child calling me mommy. And somehow, that reality hurt them more than my disappearance ever had. That night, the Sterling mansion felt stranger than ever. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. But beneath the surface, emotions churned so violently it felt suffocating. The servants prepared dinner cautiously, as if afraid someone might shatter the dining table at any second. Leo sat across from me in silence. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward me unconsciously, like he was afraid I would vanish again if he looked away too long. Arthur barely touched his food. The atmosphere was so tense that even the system stopped talking. Halfway through dinner, I finally put down my chopsticks. Leo. He looked up immediately. I need to tell you the truth. Arthur's movements stopped too. I took a slow breath. Then, for the very first time, I explained everything. Not the entire system. Not the transmigration mechanics. But enough. I told Leo that I hadn't willingly abandoned him. That I had been seriously ill back then. That returning to my original world had been the only way for me to survive. That if I hadn't left, I would have died. The dining room fell completely silent. Leo stared at me blankly. Arthur's fingers tightened slowly around his glass. I continued quietly. I wanted to tell you before leaving. But I couldn't. And after I returned, I thought you both would eventually be happier without me. Leo's lips trembled. For a long time he said nothing. Then suddenly, his chair scraped harshly against the floor. He stood up abruptly and walked out. Leo. But he was already gone. I instinctively moved to follow him. Arthur stopped me gently. Give him a minute. His voice sounded exhausted. I turned toward him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Arthur laughed softly. Back then, was I really that terrible? I looked at him honestly. Yes. He lowered his eyes. I know. The man before me no longer resembled the proud heir, who once believed I would wait forever no matter how carelessly he treated me. 7 years had worn him down too. Arthur suddenly asked quietly, Are you happy now? The question caught me off guard. I thought about David. About Noah. About our tiny apartment filled with plants and unfinished blueprints and refrigerator magnets from family trips. And I smiled unconsciously. Very. Arthur looked at that smile for a long time. Then he nodded once. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But somehow it felt like surrender. That night, I found Leo sitting alone on the balcony outside his bedroom. The city lights reflected dimly in his eyes. I walked over quietly and sat beside him. For a while neither of us spoke. Then suddenly he asked, If you stayed back then, would you have married him? I knew he meant Arthur. I thought carefully before answering. Maybe. Leo lowered his head. I used to hate you. I know. I hated you for leaving me. I know. His voice became smaller. But I also hated myself. That made my chest tighten instantly. He continued staring at the city lights. Because the last thing I said before you disappeared was that I wanted Chloe to marry Dad. Ah. So that was the wound he'd been carrying all these years. A child blaming himself for being abandoned. I reached over slowly and held his hand. You were 6 years old, Leo. You were just a child. Tears gathered silently in his eyes again. This time he didn't hide them. I waited for you for so long, he whispered. I squeezed his hand gently. I'm here now. The next month passed more peacefully than I expected. I stayed in the Sterling mansion. I ate breakfast with Leo every morning. I helped him with homework, even when he pretended not to need help. I dragged him outside to experience normal teenage things instead of locking himself in that giant lonely estate all day. Slowly he started smiling more. Not the cold, mocking smile from before. Real smiles. The system cried almost daily from happiness. Meanwhile, Arthur remained distant, polite, controlled. Sometimes, late at night, I would find him standing silently outside the living room while Leo and I watched movies together. But he never interrupted, never crossed the line again. It was as though he finally understood. Some things, once lost, could never truly be reclaimed. The last day arrived quickly. The system informed me the return channel was ready. Leo accompanied me to the transfer point. He had grown quieter again since morning. When we finally stopped walking, he suddenly hugged me tightly. This time, he was the one initiating it. "Will I see you again?" he asked softly. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. "Maybe when you're older. When you've grown into someone truly good." Leo's eyes reddened immediately. I reached up and ruffled his hair gently. "You don't need to become the heir everyone wants. You just need to become yourself." For the first time in years, the darkness in his eyes finally seemed to loosen completely. Then just before the portal opened, Arthur appeared. He stood a short distance away, the wind tugging lightly at his coat. Our eyes met one last time. 7 years ago, I had loved him desperately. But now looking at him again my heart felt calm. No resentment. No longing. Just closure. Arthur looked at me quietly. Then he said softly, "Thank you for coming back for him." "Not for me. For him." I smiled faintly. "Take better care of your son." Arthur lowered his gaze. "I will." The portal light finally engulfed me. The last thing I saw was Leo standing beside Arthur. Father and son, both watching me leave. But this time, it no longer felt like abandonment. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the unfinished underground parking lot. David was already waiting there. The moment he saw me, he strode forward and pulled me tightly into his arms. His heartbeat was warm and steady against my ear. "You came back," he murmured. I hugged him back and laughed softly. "Of course I did." Not far away, Noah waved excitedly while holding a half-melted ice cream cone. "Mommy." I walked toward them, toward my real life. And behind me, that once unforgettable world finally faded completely into the past.